Bond movies are going to have to approach the day when they're not shot on film anymore. That's going to happen. The manipulations that allows you now with dealing with the digital technology are endless and effortless. And I think some of the stuff we're doing in this, in terms of the big stunt effect sequences, are only going to be a precursor to what is going to follow in the next generation of Bond movies. The high-end action sequences that are done for real are still going to exist, but I think that it's going to be half of them will exist for real and half of them will be augmented with, and sometimes they may move into entirely digital special effects that way.
There are a couple things that come to mind when talking about Die Another Day. Buzzwords that seem to encapsulate the film for fans, and always seem to get mentioned. Invisible car, RoboCop suit, heart-stopping, windsurfing, virtual reality glasses, ice palaces, Madonna, CGI, and Halle Berry. Back in 1962, Sean Connery made his iconic introduction in Dr. No. 40 years later, the James Bond series was still chugging along. Die Another Day would again add another new director to the series, Lee Tamahora. It would have another script by Neil Purvis and Robert Wade, the screenwriters behind The World Is Not Enough. And Brosnan would be back for his fourth and final appearance as 007. Plus, Die Another Day would mark the 20th film in the official Eon series. This landmark seemed to be at the forefront on the filmmakers' minds. Honestly, I think the whole anniversary mentality was more important to the producers than the fans. Yeah, sure, 40 years, 20 films, hey, congratulations. Happy birthday, Jimbo. Now let's move on and see a good Bond film. Instead of just settling for a new anniversary documentary, maybe making one slight reference to the history of the series, and focusing on the film at hand, Die Another Day would end up including countless references, some understated, some completely obnoxious, to the past films in the series. Supposedly, every single film gets insinuated in some manner, and I don't know why. I've no problem with a nice subtle reference to a past Bond film. If it's intelligently done and doesn't distract from the story, it can be a fun treat. But the way it's handled in Die Another Day, these mentions become so overtly distracting and so self-conscious that they become aggravating, and you just wish they would stop. It's enough of a job for the series to find new original ways to tell the same story, to come up with ideas they hadn't tried before, plus competing with other action films on top of it all. Constantly making cute winks to its own history will just invite comparisons to the current film, and how it measures up with the past. When they reference past Bond films nonstop, I think to myself, oh hey, yeah, that was a good movie. That was really cool when Bond was in that scene. That was a really great action sequence. Then when it passes, I come back to the main movie and think, what the hell am I watching? A great Bond film in 2002 would have been enough of a present to honor the series' legacy, and prove the series was still going strong. That would have been plenty for me. I don't want to sit in a theater and play a Where's Waldo game with an endless string of 007 references in a 007 movie. Spoof and parody movies do that. The film starts to feel like a highlight reel. I would normally say these references become a distraction to the film's story, if it was in any way worth focusing on. Aside from the cutesy references, the film once again maintains the standard in the Brosnan age by starting out with an interesting idea in the beginning, and then quickly casting it aside. It would have a boring Bond villain, an actress playing a Bond girl who can't act and has no chemistry with Brosnan, and the required plenty of explosions. And while the film would devote some of its time honoring the legacy of the past, it would also embrace the current popular trend in filmmaking special effects, with a healthy dose of CGI. Happy anniversary! The use of CGI is quickly on display when, during the opening gun barrel sequence, we see Bond's bullet get fired right at us. I guess that was something someone was always waiting for. The film starts out with some agents surfing towards a North Korean beach. We quickly learn it's Bond and some companions who are coming out of a not too convincing ocean backdrop. They capture an arms dealer who Bond assumes the identity of. The whole sequence has a grainy, saturated look to it. Bond rigs some explosives in this suitcase of diamonds and meets Colonel Moon, who is his target. Everything seems to be going pretty well, and it's just a matter of time before Moon bites the dust, until Moon's sidekick, Zhao, discovers that Bond is an imposter. They blow up the helicopter and are ready to kill Bond, until he detonates the suitcase and uses it as a distraction to make an escape. The explosive diamond suitcase gives Zhao his unique appearance for the rest of the film. The diamonds become embedded into his face, and apparently he never gets them removed. I know that Bond henchmen typically have their own unique look, but Zhao's sparkly one is pretty silly, especially considering that later on in the film he's getting gene therapy to change his appearance, but still never gets them taken out for his new identity. I would think it'd be more helpful to get his bling taken out of his face, and then maybe worry about changing his genes. I don't know. I mean, maybe he just never made it to that stage yet, but it's still pretty stupid. The pre-credits sequence stays true to the Brosnan openings of the past. This time it's a wild chase on hovercrafts. They're alright, but the focus is on the same standards that we've seen before. Machine guns, things blowing up. Brosnan even dives away from some fire. The hovercrafts are a pretty cool vehicle, but they're not used in any real kind of fun way. They could have had the chase go from land to water, back to land, but they mainly stay on this muddy road the whole time. I suppose it's okay, but it's just not as thrilling as I think it's supposed to be, or could have been. I guess I'm old-fashioned and miss a pre-credit sequence with one highlighted stunt to start up the film. Back in the day, an explosion would be used as the punctuation to a sequence. Now they're just used consistently throughout the whole thing. It can get kind of tiring. In the end, Bond and Moon make their way to a cliff. Bond manages to escape, and Moon nosedives off a waterfall. You should really be suspicious when you don't see Moon's hovercraft not combust into a huge, gigantic explosion. Something just isn't right here. For the first time in the series, Bond gets taken prisoner, and we segue into one of the few innovative things in the film. The opening credits play over Bond's story in captivity. It might seem a bit trivial, but it's a first for the series. We still get the silhouetted hot chicks, a whole fire and ice thing with some diamonds mixed in. It's a nice idea. The downside is, unfortunately, yet again, another title song that... well, this one I think is the most out-of-place song in the entire Brosnan age. Madonna's electronic dance song is pretty bad. Worst song in the entire series? I don't necessarily think every Bond song has to be sung by Shirley Bassey, but this one seems particularly out of place, especially over the images of Brosnan being tortured. I guess you can look at it like we, the audience, are being tormented alongside Bond, having to listen to this song. It would have been cool for this anniversary film if they asked John Barry back for old time's sake, instead of having Madonna repeat the title of the film 36 times to this electronic beat. We come out of the credits sequence 14 months later with Brosnan looking all Robinson Crusoe and getting traded for Zhao. Emma's not too happy to see him and would have rather seen this trade not take place. Zhao was too evil a guy to let go, but they thought Bond was giving up information and needed to get him out. It's believed Bond revealed the identity of an American agent who was executed. A traitor is at large. The same person that informed Moon who Bond was used Bond's incarceration as the ideal excuse to free Zhao. And now 007 wants to know who. Unfortunately, M feels differently. She revokes Bond's 00 status and plans to send Bond to a comfy evaluation center. As she says,
"You're no use to anyone now."
Showing that Bond has become completely expendable. Kind of an interesting idea, and one that harkens back to Brosnan's lecture back in GoldenEye.
Because I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur. A relic of the Cold War.
Also one that can play into the 40 years of history the series has. After all the countless other action heroes 007 inspired since his debut, it could be a cool setup to go about proving that Bond is still needed, and is still the best at what he does, both at MI6 and on movie screens. First, Bond has to escape his hospital room, and he does this by slowing down his heart and overpowering the doctors. This becomes the first of several absurd Bond escapes in the film. It's pretty ridiculous seeing Bond go all zen, especially how they just confirmed it was Bond by his lousy liver. Kind of a funny throwaway line, but it makes this heart trick even more unbelievable when we get to it.
I'm checking out.
This is also the first sign that the film will have a different style compared to the traditional Bond films of the past. We get some black and white flashbacks to Bond in his cell and different speeds with the film. We've already seen the use of slow-mo in Tomorrow Never Dies, but in Die Another Day, speeding up the film, slowing it down, and a more rapid-paced editing technique will be used.
Christian, my editor, has been cutting it very fast and very progressively modern, and I use that phrase advisedly because I'm always a little hesitant myself about that kind of music video approach to action.
For a very long time, I think before MTV came out, the theory behind editing was that the best edited film was a film where you never saw the edits. I think that theory is past gone. You know, I think films like The Matrix and John Woo films and Michael Bay, just it's a flurry. It's a flurry of eye candy. I wanted to bring that kind of editing style into the Bond thing to kind of make it a little bit more hip, I guess is as close as I can get.
So they're attempting to make Bond more hip by emulating Michael Bay films. I'm not so sure that was the best inspiration they could have had. For me, seeing this style of editing being used in a Bond movie looks kind of gimmicky and made the film feel dated as soon as it was released. It just comes off exactly as what Tamahora and the editor described. A superficial method attempting to make Bond feel more hip. It might have been a better idea to first try to shake things up in other areas, like with the characters, the conflicts, the plot, and try to focus on improving the story they're going to tell, rather than just simply relying on a Michael Bay-style editing technique to solve the problem. I will say, a series of 4 films with 4 different directors, you would think that would make them all pretty distinctive from each other. And while each of Brosnan's films do look somewhat different, they all just kind of blend together for me. I always wondered how much creative control the directors actually had. Compare Brosnan's 4 Bond films to another spy action series that started around the same time as the Brosnan Bond. The Mission Impossible series. Not to get into those films, but you look at them and you see each of them had a different notable director. Brian De Palma, John Woo, J.J. Abrams. And each of those films have a distinctive tone and aesthetic look from the previous one. They really look and feel like each director is telling the story in their own personal, unique way, using their own style. Whereas with the Brosnan age, I always felt it was Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli who were the main engine and the major influence on them. I always got the impression the directors were just hired hands who were allowed very limited creative input. After the decade of the 80s, with all the Bond films directed by John Glenn, and so many Bond films that had come before, I would have thought that the series was ready for a major change. Maybe use the opportunity to present each new film as one particular director's own spin on the standard Bond conventions the series had used for decades. One of the more interesting Bond rumors that came out had been Quentin Tarantino wanting to film a period adaptation of Casino Royale with Brosnan. And the Bros was supposedly all for the idea. I'm not sure how it would have turned out, but I think it would have had more of a director's stamp on it than Brosnan's 4 films he did. So Bond escapes from a not-too-convincing ship deck and surfaces out of a not-too-convincing Hong Kong harbor. He strolls into a posh hotel, says his name, and is immediately given a room. It's supposed to be a light, funny scene, and it comes off pretty ridiculous when you consider MI6 is now looking for him, and him checking into a nearby hotel, one that he apparently frequents, using his name and looking the way he does. It might be a pretty easy way for them to track him down. But they don't. Brosnan loses his beard and long hair with the trusty Norelco Spectra shaver, one of the many product placement deals the film had. And with this shave, Bond's 14-month incarceration is dropped, and never explored any further in the film. Any physical, mental, emotional repercussions on the character are apparently non-existent. The only consequences from the opening prison stay Bond had was he grew a beard and got really horny. Once again, an interesting idea starts for Brosnan's Bond and is then quickly cast aside. Bond gets the help from Chinese intelligence, with them providing him with information, plane tickets, money, and he heads to Cuba to find Zhao. In Cuba, Bond gets some more assistance. How? He mentions Universal Exports and says he's James Bond. Okay, so Bond is a rogue agent now, and maybe that will lead to some new ways to see how Bond operates on his own, and adapt to the situation. But he's pretty much following the same basic MO he does when he's authorized by M to go on a mission. He meets contacts, says he's James Bond, and people help him. It's not really that exciting. At least when Dalton went rogue, you felt this wasn't just another mission, but he was using his abilities and avoiding MI6 who were trying to stop him.
Get me out of these bloody things.
No, Commander. You're a loose cannon on deck. I'm shipping you straight back to London.
Yeah, Q showed up to help him, but at least the whole rogue agent idea was actually used and played out. Supposedly early on there was the idea of having Wei Lin return to help Bond in Hong Kong. I think that would have been a bit more interesting and different. Plus they could have gotten the Big Tomorrow Never Dies reference out of the way. But Michelle Yeoh never returned. They always seem to nix these ideas of having a Bond girl reappear in a second film.
We've been hearing rumors about the Icarus space program. What's the big secret?
It's not a secret, it's a surprise, but don't worry, you'll soon be enlightened.